All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Dave and Tim aren't here yet, but I'm going to go ahead and get started without them. So, my name is Oliver Singh, and thank you all for coming. It's hopefully going to be a fun morning. So, just a little personal background about myself. I have a bachelor's in double E from Georgia Tech, and I have a master's in science religion from Biola University. And I just got my postgraduate certificate in Shroud Studies from the Athenaeum Pontifical Regina Apostolorum. I had to practice that about 100 times in order to say that. And I'm a deacon at Perimeter Church. So, just a few caveats. The Shroud of Turin is a huge topic, and it would take a long time to talk about everything. As a matter of fact, I gave a 4-week talk at Perimeter Church on this, and I still didn't cover everything. So we're only going to be here for less than 60 minutes, so we're only going to narrow down on the science of the shroud. Now, even though we're only talking about the science of the shroud, I'm still going to give you just a portion of the science. I'm not going to talk about all of the science. So don't say, hey, Oliver, you didn't even talk about this about the science. Yeah, I intentionally did not talk about everything about the science. But we will have time at the very end to have a Q&A session. And I'm going to avoid approaching this from a religious point of view, even though I could talk about it from a religious point of view. But usually I'll talk about that in the later talks. So in the first talk, I usually just only talk about it from a scientific point of view. So even before I talk about this, how many people here have heard about the Shroud of Turin? I think almost everybody. Okay. And how many people here believe the Shroud of Turin is authentic? So maybe about half. How many people are on the fence, that you don't know? So about 50%. And how many people here? I forgot. Did I ask how many people think it's a fake?
50%.
Yeah, 50% real, 50% not sure. And then how many people believe it's a fake? All right, no one wants to admit that. Okay. All right. Okay. Jeff's not here. Okay. So I'll just quickly go over this since most of you know about what is a Shroud of Turin. It's a cloth roughly 15 foot, 3 inches long and 3 feet, 7 inches wide, made of linen fabric with a herringbone weave. It has a faint image of a front and back of a crucified person, reddish blood marks on the body, burn marks on it, water damage, crease marks, pieces cut from the shroud in the top 2 corners, and a side strip. And so I have a small replica of the shroud here. I don't have a full-size one. The full-size one is just way too big. But this is a replica of the shroud. And so if you were to actually see the Shroud of Turin, this would be what it would look like. Now, when you look at this, especially for the first time, you say, what in the world am I looking at? It's not very obvious, and that is for sure. Because when I first saw it, I only saw these burn marks right here. And I said, okay, I don't see a person there in the burn marks, but that's not the image of the person. The image of the person is right here in the middle. Okay. You can just hold that in. Okay, right here. So here's the image of the man. Right here, this is the frontal image, and it's very faint. It's hard. I don't even think the people in the back can really see it. So it is very faint. But here's the burn marks. And then on the other side is the other side, the back side, the dorsal side, and then the head, and then the back, and then the legs, and then the feet. So as you can tell, it's very, very faint. And there's water damage, crease marks, pieces cut from the shroud in the top 2 corners, side strip, and press the wrong button. Okay. Now, the shroud is located in St. John the Baptist Church in Turin, Italy, and it's sealed inside a protective metal case, so you cannot see the shroud. If you go to the Turin and go to St. John the Baptist, You won't be able to see it. It is only on public display every 5, 10, 20 years, whatever they decide to show the shroud. They were planning on showing the shroud this year, since it's the year of Jubilee, but they decided not to show it. So we don't know when they will show the shroud publicly for the next time. So the last time they showed the shroud was in 2015. Now, the shroud is the most studied artifact. I think that's interesting. Perhaps no religious relic has received more scientific scrutiny than the shroud. And it's the single most studied artifact in human history. And so it's sort of curious that if this is the most studied artifact, how come really nobody knows much about it? I mean, you hear a little bit about it, but not much. And so I find that very odd. Now, there's two main views of the shroud. One, it's either a medieval fake produced by an artist, or two, it's a first century burial shroud of a crucified man from Jerusalem. I would say 99% of people fall into one of these two camps. Now, I've heard one person say it's from a space alien, but that's a very minority position. Okay, so here's a picture of the shroud, and again, very faint. If you were actually to go see it, it's very hard to discern this. Let me go back here. So this is how the shroud would have wrapped the crucified person. So it would have wrapped around from there, and then over the top of the head, and then back to the feet. Does everybody see that, how it works?
That was typical of the day.
Right. The Jewish burial.
Right.
And so here is a picture of Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. And I was there earlier this year. We went on a pilgrimage tour to Italy, and I was part of the class that had graduated from APRA, and we were hoping to go see the shroud since it was the year of Jubilee, but unfortunately we weren't able to go see it, but at least we were able to go visit the church. So if you're to walk inside the building, you'll see the altar at the very end. And how many people have been to Italy? Okay, about half. How many? And you visit the churches over there, beautiful cathedrals, right? Magnificent. But you go to this is sort of plain compared to all the other churches in Italy. And so here it's sort of strange thinking, okay, here is the most studied artifact, and then this is a plain looking church. So you walk down the aisle. As you get closer to the altar, you look to the left, and then this is where the shroud is held at. The St. John the Baptist Cathedral is right next to the royal palace. So the royal king, when they went to Mass, this is where they sat during their Mass. And then as you walk closer, then this is where the shroud is at. So the shroud is inside a box, and it's underneath this cloth. So you can't see the shroud at all if you go visit the cathedral.
Is it straightened out, or is it folded?
It is straightened out. It is straightened out. So the reason that it's straightened out is they're trying to protect the cloth. So they don't want to have any weight on it. If you hold it, if it was like this, it might stretch. It's inside a dark, so they don't have any light that's affecting it. It's filled with argon, so no gas can affect it. The humidity is controlled. It's bulletproof, so it's very, very secure, which is sort of nice to protect it, but it also prevents everybody else from seeing the shroud. So Turin is in northwest of Italy. How many people have been to Turin? One. Yeah, so this is very interesting. I mean, when we go to Italy, we visit all the famous places, right? Rome, Florence, Venice, Milan. Very few people actually even go to Turin, which is strange also. Now, there is a church here in Cumming. You can go see a replica of it, and it's free. It's at St. Brendan Catholic Church, and I'd highly recommend it. And I was just there Saturday, actually. So, yeah, you can go there. You don't have to tell them. Just show up. They have a room down there. You can just go in there for free. So I'm going to cover the scientific study milestones of the Shroud and then fill in with a lot of the scientific evidence that was accumulated during this time frame. So the first milestone was in 1898 when the first photograph of the Shroud was taken by an amateur photographer named Secunda Pia. And then the second photograph was taken in 1931 by Giuseppe Henry. He was a professional photographer. And so when he took it, it was a very, very high quality image. I'll show you that later. In 1978, the STURP team investigated it. And that was the first and really the only true scientific study of the Shroud that was hands-on with the Shroud itself. In 1988, they did a carbon-14 dating of the Shroud by taking a few samples from the Shroud. So here's Secunda Pia in 1898, and he was an amateur photographer. And if you looked at the Shroud, this is sort of like what you would see. But when he developed it, it looked like on the right. This is the negative. And he looked at the negative, he said, he was in wonder. It's like, okay, he realized, because he was a photographer, there's something going on here. Now, why would the negative be more discernible of the image than the positive? Why is that?
Contrast. The image is the negative.
Exactly. Exactly. So what this is actually is, this is the negative. And so when you take a negative of the negative, you get the positive. So this is what he discovered, is that what we're actually seeing with our eyes is the negative. Now, when he published this, everybody said, okay, you are just lying. Nobody believed him because that concept does not make any sense. So really, very few people believe Secunda Pia. Now, we're going to do an experiment. I don't know, everybody have their phones? So if you have an iPhone, I'll let you take a look at the image of this face. And the way to do it is on the iPhone, go to Settings, Accessibility, Display and Text Size, Classic Invert. So, or if you have an Android app, go to Settings, Accessibility, Display, Color Inversion. And I will pass this around, and you can try for yourself. So you take out your phone, and
Delete WhatsApp messages that expose.
so anybody got there? I'll
Yes,
hand this to you.
great.
Okay, now open your camera.
Okay,
Okay, now point it at this face.
okay.
Now what do you see?
I see what you showed.
Okay, now point at someone else's face. Point at your friend's face. Just see what she looks like.
Ooh, not so nice.
Anybody else? Anybody? Two negatives make a positive. That's the thing. Yeah, two negatives makes a positive. Okay. So that's weird. How can you explain that? So a professional photographer, Henry, in 1931, took the second image, and then he proved that Secunda Pia's photograph was correct. So then everybody accepted what Secunda Pia took. He validated it. Now, there's another property on the Shroud, and this was proposed in the early 1900s first by Paul Vignon, and he theorized there is 3D information encoded in the Shroud. Now, what does that mean? It means that the areas that are darker means the body was closer to the cloth. So it's sort of hard to see, but as you go to the sides of the body, it gets lighter, right? Because closer towards the center of the body, it's darker. And so he theorized, maybe there's a relationship between the darkness and then the distance between the body and the cloth. And so that was an interesting theory. And so other people tried to do some experiments to try to confirm that. So Leo Valla in 1950s, he took 2 images of the shroud, offset it, and then projected it onto a clay sculpture and then he tried to sculpt it and tried to match those 2 images. It's also like a stereoscopic image. And he was able to create something like that. So that was pretty ingenious. Another person, Paul Gasneau, in 1974, he took light, and the amount of light controlled a engraver. And then so that engraver would go into different distances based on the amount of light. And then he was sort of able to make sort of a 3D representation based on how much light it was picking up at certain parts of the shroud. So that was an interesting experiment. And then in 1976, they invented the VP8 image analyzer. This device was used in the military, and it can convert darkness into depth information. And so you see it here. So you can see this looks like a 3D model of the face of Jesus. You can see it more here. So this confirmed that there was 3D properties encoded on the shroud. No other photograph has this property. So if you put any other photograph in there, it doesn't have the 3D properties. And so this launched the 1978 STURP team. So John Jackson was the lead of it, and Eric Jumper was the co-lead. And so they were able to go to Turin, Italy to study the shroud. They studied the shroud for 5 continuous days in Turin, nonstop, around the clock. The only group of people who were able to do this. And it was comprised of over 30 scientists. And so here's their conclusion. After years of exhaustive study and evaluation of the data and the submission of their research to highly regarded peer-reviewed scientific journals, the following official summary of the STURP's conclusion was written by John Heller and distributed at the press conference held after STURP's final meeting in October 1981. No pigments, paints, dyes, or stains have been found on the fibrils. X-ray fluorescence and microchemistry on the fibrils preclude the possibility of paint being used as a method for creating the image. Ultraviolet and infrared evaluation confirm these studies. I will skip that, but I'll say this. Thus, the answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains now, as it has in the past, a mystery. We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. So they were not able to conclude how the image was made. All they could conclude was how the image was not made. So I'm going to talk about some of the features of the shroud. It's on a herringbone weave. Anybody know what a herringbone weave is? Yeah, all the females do. The guys don't. Yeah, so there's like a crisscross sign. So it's like your jeans sort of has this crisscross pattern as well. So it's a very fancy weave, and it's not very common. There is no substance between the threads. So it's not like a paint, and there's like capillary action or any sort of anything between the threads to form the image. Now, there's blood between the threads, but there is nothing between the threads to form the image part. There is also a side strip, and you can sort of see it on this line across the top. At one point, that was cut off from the shroud, and then it was reattached. So it's about a 3-inch wide side strip. We don't really know why they did that. There are some theories. And then here's a close-up of that seam. So it's a very fancy seam that they use to tie those together. And as I mentioned in the STURP findings, there's no presence of any paint, dye, pigment, or any medium that's been added to the cloth for the image itself. It is only the fibers that are discolored that is causing the image. And the reason that it's discolored is because of dehydration and oxidization of the fibers. it is only a change at the atomic level that is causing the image change. It is the change in the covalent bonds of the carbon atoms that is changing this. So if it was an artist in the medieval times, he would have to understand how to manipulate these carbon atoms to change their covalent bonds. And we see that there are some fibers that's colored and then some fibers that are discolored. So it's not like all of them are colored here or all of them are, it's just sort of like randomly. One fiber, okay, there's about 100 fibers in each thread. So this is a close-up. So this is one of the threads here. There's about 100 fibers in each thread. And a fiber is only 10 to 15 microns in diameter. That's about the size of a white blood cell. So the artist would have been able to discolor it at the level of a white blood cell. But it's, and here is cross-section of the threads. There's about 100 in each thread, and only the top 1, 2, or 3 fibers are discolored. It's not all of them that's discolored. Only the surface of a thread is discolored. Even more than that, on a fiber itself, only the circumference of the fiber is discolored, not the interior of a fiber. And so that is about 0.2 of a micron in size where it's actually discolored. That's about the size of a virus. So the artist would have understood how to discolor it at the size of a virus level. Now, another interesting thing is the halftone effect. Now, you can see this picture on the left, and you don't see the dots. But as you get closer, the image is actually made out of dots. So you look at any newspaper, magazine, book, and look at any images, it's all through the halftone effect. It's all made up of dots. This is exactly what's happening here on the shroud. You get a close-up of this. I mean, does anybody know what part of the shroud this is? Just by looking at that? No, because it's the halftone effect. You're seeing is sort of like dots. But as you go out, this is the face. So the previous one was just right here, zoomed in the center. And so we see the halftone effect on the shroud. So the medieval artists would have understood the halftone effect as well. There's no brush strokes on the image. And so the only way I can think about to explain this is like an airbrush type effect. So as you can tell, there is no brush strokes, but if you use an airbrush, you could have probably simulated this. So the medieval artists also knew about the airbrush effect. The blood is real, it's not fake, and it's still red. Now you can't see that on these reproductions here, but if you actually go to and see the actual shroud, it is reddish in color. Now why is that? Because most, if you have blood on the Band-Aid, and then it's going to turn dark, brownish, relatively quickly, but over hundreds, thousands of years, it's still red. The blood has no breakage or smearing. So that means that if you put a cloth over your wound and then you tear it off, it's going to create smearing or smudging on the cloth, but there is no evidence of that. There is no body image under the blood. So wherever there's blood, that means there's no body image under that. What that means is that the blood stains came on the cloth first, and then the imaging came on top of that. The nail through the wrist. If you go to any museum, art display, church, most of the nails go through the center of the palm. When we were on the pilgrimage, I was specifically looking for this, looking at all the crucifixes, looking at the arts, everything in the churches. Most of the renditions is the nail going through the center of the palm. But after looking and researching about the shroud, they're thinking, it actually makes more sense if the nail went through the wrist, because that way it can hold up the body. If the nail went through the center of the palm, it would not be able to hold the body during crucifixion, but it could hold it up when it's nailed through the center of the wrist. There's scourging. There's 372 total scourge marks on the body. This has been enhanced by Ray Downing, and so wherever you see scourging, he's made it red. And you can see it's all over the front and the back of the body. And we see here on the legs, and he was completely naked. And I bought one of his, and then you can see it here. And so you can see how much this man was scourged all over. And he was nude, and he was, it's very interesting. You can see sort of these parallel lines like this. So what people are deducing is that there were two scourges, one on each side. And you also notice that all these scourges are sort of evenly spaced. And so what that shows to me is that these scourgers were professionals. They wanted to cover every part of the body equally to maximize their pain. Now, through UV light, we can tell that these scourge marks are like dumbbell shaped. So what that means is, I didn't include that. So there's different types of scourges. There's one that is like they're called a Scorpio, where they have glass metal endings. So if you've seen the Passion of the Christ, you see how that was a Scorpio. It actually tore the flesh. Whereas with this was more like dumbbell-shaped, barbell-shaped endings on it, and it didn't really tear the flesh. So it produced wounds, but it wouldn't actually tear it open. So we see this under the UV lighting. There's also blood marks all over the head. So in typical depictions of the crown of thorns, it's mostly just like a laurel just around. But with this shows that it was all over the head. So the crown of thorns was completely more like a cap. And the side wound here, blood from the side wound. And over there on the other side, there's evidence of facial wounds. One of the cheeks is swollen. Nose seems to be broken a little bit. The beard seems to be pulled, and the body is in a state of rigor mortis. So you can see the bottom of the feet completely pressed flat against the cloth. So his foot was like, like this. And so during this, this cloth was actually able to capture the state of rigor mortis of the body. There's no evidence of any decomposition on the shroud. Through UV lighting and enhancements, you can see there's differences in colors of the actual thread. And so that produces a cloth banding. So it shows that this was more like a more simple way of dyeing the threads. So later in the medieval time, they had perfected dyeing the threads to make it more uniform. But the threads show banding, so it shows that it's most likely not from the Middle Ages. Now, there's angle encoded information, and what I mean by that is there is some sort of correlation between the angle of the cloth and the imaging. So if the angle of the cloth was like this, there would be less imaging. And we see that because we don't see the ears on the shroud. You look at the shroud image at all, and you don't see any ears, which is sort of strange, and you don't see any thumbs. And then as you get to the side of the image, it's very faint. And at the top of the head, there's no imaging as well. So everything where the cloth was at this angle, there's less imaging. We also see an X-ray effect, and so you can see the metacarpal bones in the fingers here, And I believe you can see teeth. So there's sort of like teeth that you can see as well. So there's sort of like an X-ray effect. And the dimensions of the cloth matches the cubit. So the size of the cloth is 8 by 2 cubits according to the Assyrian cubit. There's evidence of shoulder abrasions under UV lighting. There's blood serum retraction rings. So you can see this here, this white area around there is evidence of serum. So blood has serum and plasma. So the plasma part is the part that coagulates. When it coagulates, it gets smaller, but the serum doesn't coagulate. And so when this plasma coagulates, then the serum ring around it shows up under UV lighting. It is a type AB blood. And some people ask about DNA. You can't really extract DNA from the blood, but so many people have touched it, they're leaving their DNA on it. And so they've been able to trace that DNA, and they've been able to identify where those people who have touched the shroud came from. And most of it centers around the Middle East area. So the 1988 carbon-14 testing, 3 labs tested it. Zurich, Oxford, and Arizona each received less than a 1 square centimeter sample, and they dated it to 1260 to 1390. And this was the sample site. And so this is half of the shroud right here. And then here's a little corner. It's this part right here. And then they cut it a little bit right here. And then each of them got a small piece of that. So it was a very, very small sample that each lab got.
You said it was dated 1290.
1260 to 1390. 1260 to 1390. With carbon dating, yes. So the samples that they got, Arizona got a small sliver here, and then Oxford got this sample, Zurich got this sample, and then Arizona got another small, the other part over there. So Arizona got 2 pieces, and the other labs got 1 piece. And if you look at any pictures, you can tell when the pictures was taken. So this was taken before 1988 because you don't see that cut off. But you see this corner cut off here, so you know that this was taken after 1988. So their conclusion was, these results therefore provide conclusive evidence that the linen of the shroud is medieval, since they dated it to 1260 and 1390. However, they did not release the raw data to their reports, and it took more than 27 years for the raw data to be released, to be analyzed by the scientists. And in 2017, Tristan Casabianca used the Freedom of Information Act to get the information from the British Museum. And what they discovered was that there was a discrepancy between the official report and the raw data. And the raw data, some of their data was dropped for Zurich, and then some of the data was dropped for Arizona. And so the question is, why did they drop the data? Why did they manipulate this data? So they analyzed it. And what they found was there was a correlation between the distance their sample was from the edge of the cloth to the dating. So as you got closer to the center of the cloth, it got younger. Now, in statistics, there's a certain range that you need to be within. So let's just suppose you're weighing 2 people, and person A, he gets weighed on Monday, he weighs 100 pounds on Monday, and then on Tuesday he weighs 101 pounds, and then on Wednesday he weighs 103 pounds. That sounds reasonable, right? Let's say you weigh person B. On Monday he weighs 100 pounds, on Tuesday he weighs 150 pounds, and then on Wednesday he weighs 200 pounds. That does not seem reasonable. So we have to analyze the data that we get and see how reasonable the answers are. And so they had 3 control samples when they studied the shroud. And the higher the significance level means you have greater confidence in those numbers. And so you can see in these charts, a lot of these overlap. So they took 3 measurements and they overlapped a lot. So that shows, oh, that's pretty good. So they had a very high significance level, 90%. Control sample number 2, there was a lot of overlap too, but not as much. Significance level of 50%. And control sample number 3, not as much overlap, so significance number 30%. With the Shroud of Turin, actually there's 2 parts that don't even overlap very much. And so they only had a significance level of 5%. What do you think is the minimum number required to be accepted in a peer-reviewed journal? 5%. So they barely squeaked in. That was only because they manipulated the data. If they would have included the raw data, they would have fallen below 5%. So that's why they manipulated the data. Ray Rogers published evidence that the samples were not homogeneous. It actually included some cotton in 2005. And then recently in 2022, they did another measurement of the wide-angle X-ray scattering, the wax, and they dated to be around 2,000 years. So that's a lot of the high level of the scientific evidence of the shroud. There's much more that I can cover. If you want more information, you can go to othonia.org, and that just been recently published. And so it has a lot of recent information. Shroud.com is the most comprehensive. So if you want to read a lot of scientific papers, go to that. And I have my own website that I created called debatingchristianity.com. There's a page on that totally devoted to the Shroud of Turin, and I cover many things about the shroud. Okay, I'll open up for questions. We have about 15 minutes.
So Oliver, what's the motivation for them skewing the information, or why do you
Carbon
think-
14 dating.
Yes.
Well,
Wh-
they
why-
only dropped some of the data in order to make sure that the significance level was not 4% but 5%. So once you hit 5%, then it's accepted that you can publish these results. But if it was 4%, they could not publish it. So that is why they manipulate. Now the question after that is, but it is still dated medieval, 1260 to 1390. How to explain that? That is for another talk. Because that is so complicated. That is so complicated. What evidence is there on the Shroud of Turin that points specifically to Jesus of Nazareth rather than just any other person that was crucified? And I would say there's a few things. One is the crown of thorns. So if you read the Gospels do not go into hardly any detail about the scourging. It hardly goes into any detail about the crucifixion. But it does go into detail about the crown of thorns. Why is that? Because that was so unusual. The crown of thorns was not something that they normally did to the crucifixion victims. So that is one evidence. Another evidence is there is no broken bones on the Shroud of Turin. So both of the thieves on both sides of Jesus, those bones were broken. Also, he was pierced on the side, and there's no evidence that the others were also pierced on the side. So you add all those things together, it matches the Gospels, and it doesn't match anyone. There's nobody else described that way.
What about the blood still being a red color? That would have
Yeah,
dissipated over.
yeah. So there's various theories about that. One theory is there's high levels of bilirubin in the blood because of all the trauma that he went through, and that bilirubin affected the blood so that it stayed in that permanent color. Another theory is neutron radiation that's emitted from the body and that's a whole nother area. But that neutron radiation also affected the color of the shroud. So those are the two top theories why it's still red. But if you're a medieval artist, would you even go to the trouble of making it still red? And how did he figure out how to make it still red? And also deceive all of us. We don't know it, but yet he knew it.
Is there a conclusion about the size of the man?
Yeah, so he would be about, what I've heard, 5'10", 5'11", about 170 pounds. That's another long talk. So I'll start with the most documented history that everybody agrees with, whether it's an authenticist or a skeptic. So in the mid-1350s, it was in Lille, France. And so we have documentation and we have archaeological evidence that the shroud, it wasn't called the Shroud of Turin at that point, but the shroud was in Lille, France. And then after that, it was acquired by the House of Savoy. When the House of Savoy made Turin their capital, they brought the shroud to the Turin, and that was where the House of Savoy had their capital. And so it's been there ever since. So the Savoy family has actually owned the shroud until 1983, when the last king of the Savoy died, King Umberto II died, and he willed it to the living pope. And so since 1985, the living pope actually owns the shroud. So it's actually very recently that the Catholic Church has owned the shroud. Okay, so the problem is, obviously, they're not going to say, oh, the Shroud of Turin used to be in Edessa, or Shroud of Turin used to be in Constantinople. So it was by other names. So you have to sort of infer what was it called prior. And so there's theories, but since you have to infer that, there's no hard evidence that it was actually in these places. But prior to Lille, France, most authenticists believe that it was in Constantinople, and then in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, someone took it from Constantinople and brought it to France. And before that, it was probably Edessa, maybe Antioch before that, and then Jerusalem before that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so a scientist, Pablo de Lazzaro, did an experiment using X-ray lasers trying to emulate this oxidation, dehydration of the fibers. And he did that by using X-ray lasers, and he was able to replicate that, but only on just a few fibers. So if you extrapolate the energy required just for the few fibers to the entire shroud, it would require 34,000 billion watts of energy for the entire shroud. So that's the energy equivalent in order to create an image like this for a shroud of that size.
So are there no other shrouds with images on them? So you would say that's why this is so
The only other shrouds with images on them are hand painted, and you can prove those are painted. But as for a natural, there's no other shroud like this.
The material, with the herringbone pattern, did they weave that by hand?
They weaved that by hand.
Oh,
Now, it was probably on some sort of loom, but it was by hand. Yes, so it's very, very expensive. Very, very expensive. Now, to me, why would a medieval artist use an expensive weave? Because the Bible mentions nothing about a herringbone weave. So if I was a forger, I'm not going to spend extra money to buy a herringbone weave cloth. And I'm just going to buy a cheap cloth because the Bible says nothing about it.
Why is it not on display?
You have to ask the Pope that question. Yeah, why is it not on display? Well, there are logistics problems because if it's on display, a lot of people want to see it, and you'd only have a certain amount of time to see it, and they don't want people vandalizing it. So there's a whole bunch of reasons that they give, but I'm hoping in 2033 they better show the shroud. If they do not show the shroud on the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus will be very, very mad. Yes.
So what are a few of the most amazing things you have found in your study of the scriptures on the burial of Jesus that align to the shroud?
Yeah, yeah. When Peter and the beloved disciple came to the tomb, the beloved disciple saw and believed. What did he see and what did he believe? The Gospels do not explain exactly what he saw, and it does not explain what he believed. But I believe through the shroud, it answers that for me. I believe he believed that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. And what he saw was this cloth and I don't have a model Jesus with me, but let's just pretend this is Jesus here, and then this was wrapped around like that. And I had mentioned about the side strip. The side strip wound around the body like this. Okay, so he was all wrapped up with the side strip around him. Now, if the body was there, it'd be like this. So what I believe he saw was there was nothing inside. It had flattened. The side strips were still wound around it. So obviously at that point, the body just disappeared. Because if someone stole it, they would have taken off the side strip and then, taken the body and then just thrown it back. But no, he didn't see that. And it also, in the Gospel of John, it also said he saw the linen cloths, plural. So there's several cloths involved. One is that side strip, one is the shroud, and another one was that head wrap, the sudarium that wrapped his head. That was folded to the side. So I believe he saw 3 pieces of cloth in that tomb. So that's one example to me of the illumination of the shroud to the Gospels. So I think there's many purposes for the shroud. One is to argue that Jesus actually exists and he was crucified, dead, and buried, and resurrected. But I think another purpose is to illuminate Scripture, because there's a lot of things that are not said, like the scourging. It doesn't hardly talk about it, but we can understand it. It doesn't talk about his crucifixion, how he was actually crucified, within the wrist. It doesn't talk about that, but this explains it. With the beloved disciple going into the tomb, what he sees and believing, it explains that to me as well. So there's many things actually, and I have another talk on that, on all the things that illuminates Scripture with.
When can we come to that talk?
Yeah, when Dave and Tim invites me back.
Or go to church.
Or go to church, yeah.
Or your church.
Yeah. Yes. No, none of them really determine the age of the person, but it seems to be a young man. You can tell just by the features and by he was semi-muscular. He was fit, so he definitely wasn't a young child or a very old man. So somewhere 20s, 30s, most likely. Okay, yes.
Isn't the head covering, wasn't it distinctly separate?
It was distinctly
from the
separate.
shroud?
Yes.
Isn't it supposedly in Spain?
Yes, yeah.
And number 3, has it been studied to the extent that this and
Yes.
authenticated?
Yes. So that's the Sudarium in Oviedo, Spain. it was the head cloth that was covering the face of Jesus. And they have done studies on that, and they believe it is also authentic because there's many things that match with the shroud, including the blood type, the blood patterns, pollen, and other things as well. And interestingly, that has been carbon dated to around the 600s. So that's also interesting. And affinity for the Shroud of Turin, they actually don't. They don't have affinity towards it at all. You can see that when you go visit St. John the Baptist Cathedral. There's nothing special about that church. Plain, really. No sign saying this way to the Shroud of Turin. No, you're not going to see that. You go to Turin, there's no sign saying, okay, this way to the Shroud of Turin. Good luck trying to find the Shroud of Turin. It's very hard to find. So the Catholic Church says almost nothing about this, really. And I've talked to Catholics, and they don't hardly know about it either. Even priests, they don't even know about it.
So we donated it to the Pope, just a tax write-off?
I think if you're going to pick one person to at least trust with this, it probably would be the Pope. I mean, who else would you trust? So that's the only person they could think of to trust. And another thing with that is there's always a succession of popes. So you know that whoever's the next pope will own it as well. Well, yeah. So they don't claim that any of their relics are authentic, including the Shroud of Turin. So the Catholic Church has no position on the Shroud of Turin. But they have no position on any relic, really. So they don't say any of it is authentic. So according to the Gospels, it was on the side. It was not with it. And so what's theorized is the headcloth was actually only used when they moved Jesus from the cross into the tomb. So they wanted to hold the blood also for modesty because he was severely beaten. His face was beaten. He was scourged, crown of thorns, and they also wanted to just keep the blood intact. And so when they moved the body from the cross into the tomb, that headcloth was on. After he got into the tomb, they took that headcloth off, and then they folded it to the side, and then they placed the body of Jesus on the shroud. Now, that's what I believe, but there's other scenarios as well that other people propose. But that makes the most sense to me. All right, well, thank you. So I have one last request. I'd like to take a picture of all of us. So